social entrepreneurship in Africa. My name is Rehmah Kasule. I grew up in Egypt, and I'm currently a second-year master in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. Most recently, I worked in a healthcare startup in Cairo. Unfortunately, I learned yesterday that two of our panelists, Dr. Muhammad Aburawi and Mr. Obi Charles Nana, could not make it. I panicked a little bit, but thankfully for us, Mr. Alexander Tsado agreed to join, as well as Samlara Baah. Very last minute, so thank you both so much for saving my life. In terms of structure, I thought I wanted to keep this rather informal, and so I have a lot of questions prepared, but I thought maybe I can take 30 minutes of moderated questions and then leave it up to you to really steer this conversation in whatever direction you want to go. So yeah, does that sound good? So I'm really excited now to introduce our amazing set of panelists. First, I'll start with Rehmah Kasule, is that right? Who is a Ugandan entrepreneur and founder of CEDA International. Her work impacted over 180,000 youth and women to reframe their thinking and attitudes and lead change in their communities. She consulted on education reform, gender inequality, and private sector development for the United Nations, the African Development Bank, and the International Trade Center. She is currently a senior fellow at the Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative, working on Pulse in Africa, a social venture that is creating career and employment pathways for youth in Africa through innovation and technology. Collaborating with the private sector, her work is building solutions to strengthen the labor and entrepreneurship ecosystem to address youth unemployment. Her work has won several international awards and was recognized by Rehmah Kasule. Welcome. I'd also like to introduce Patel, who is the co-founder and CEO of Enlight, a startup that's focused on skill development for the off-grid solar industry by working with solar companies to solve their human capital needs through their last-minute technical and sales training for youth in Northern Uganda. He's also the co-founder at Village Energy, a Ugandan solar last-minute distributor focused on productive use of energy, including custom solar installations for our businesses. Prior to moving to Uganda in 2015, he spent 5 years at Google in advertising and sales. He is an Acumen East Africa Fellow and City Year alumni with years of experience tutoring and mentoring inner city youth. Welcome, Jay. We also have Alexander Tsado, who is the founder of Alliance for AI, a hub for AI and emerging technologies in Africa, which is, as a virtual accelerator, empowers schools, startups, and governments to be more successful in applying AI to solving critical challenges that can reposition Africa in the global economic landscape. Today, the Alliance for AI advises governments on AI policy, supports more than 70 AI startups, and partners with training organizations that collectively empowered more than 50,000 Africans in 2019. He's also a product lead for high-performance cloud computing at NVIDIA. So, welcome. And finally, we have Samlara Baah, who is the founder of Loo Works Limited, which she started in 2014 with the goal of changing the sanitation landscape in Ghana. The company creates dignified household toilet solutions for low-income populations. Loo Works is currently working to scale. Today, the company manufactures privacy structures paired with a biological digester for low-income communities in Ghana. She's currently a mid-career Master in Public Administration candidate at the Harvard Kennedy School as well. She's an Adrian Cheng Fellow. As a Cheng Fellow, her focus is on creating an ecosystem to support low-income communities through advocacy and knowledge-sharing campaigns while increasing the range of funding models for underserved communities. She's also very interested in creating opportunities for upcoming entrepreneurs in the developing world, of course, so maybe, if I may start with Jay. You began your career at City Year in New York before joining Google, and then you co-founded Village Energy in 2015 and Enlight in 2018. Maybe can you tell us more about this journey? How and why did you start Enlight and before that Village Energy?
Yeah. So. Hello. Okay. So I went to Penn. I helped organize these types of conferences, work in international development. I did project work in India and China. And then, I wanted to go ideally directly into kind of some sort of consulting or something like that that's related to the space. The only problem is that I graduated in 2009, and I don't know if you guys have heard, but there was a little bit of some economic turmoil. So I ended up doing a community service program, which was like, I'd done community service in college, but it was definitely like not the direction I had intended it. But it turned out to be really good, and I did the program, and I really enjoyed it, and I really got into mentoring youth. And then, really randomly, that's a longer story, but just randomly had my resume end up in the hands of a Google recruiter who recruited me to go and do customer service at Google. So working for the sexiest company, doing the least sexy job. So, I was wearing a headset all day and taking calls for people who called literally 866 to Google. But then I went into sales and I did that for 5 years, and I learned a lot, but I was feeling like I wanted to get back to my roots of working in development. So I just started to get back into it. So I started going to Ashoka events, and I started getting involved in that community. And over time, I kind of developed this interest in off-grid energy. And I had never actually been to Africa. I had no ties to East Africa. I know there's a lot of like Indians from East Africa. I am not one of them. But I knew that I wanted an inventor really, and Google had an office in Nairobi. So I said, okay, let me just go out there, take a leave of absence, go out and see if I can talk my way onto that team to work in solar. Well, that didn't work. But there was a conference happening that we called Sun Cult, which happens every year, and all the solar companies were at that conference that week. So I said, all right, well, let me just dust off my resume and let me attend. And some of the companies were like, hey, we're interviewing in Tanzania and Uganda, come out there. So I just booked the flight to Uganda. And fun story, anyone here has been to Uganda? Okay, so then you might know the exchange rate in shillings. So Kenyan shillings is about 100 shillings to the dollar. I land in Uganda, and I said, I didn't actually look up the exchange rate before I went out of the airport, so I said, let me pull out what I think is a large amount of money, which is 50,000 shillings. It is about 3,700 shillings to the dollar, so I pulled out about $10. So I was left actually with no money in the middle of Kampala at some point before I was able to find an ATM that worked. So, but it was interesting because I never really intended to end up in Uganda. I just kept following this trail of jelly beans, and I said, oh, this looks shiny, and let me just keep doing it. So while I was in Uganda, I had actually gotten connected to a Ugandan social entrepreneur named Abu Musuza, which Rehmah also knows. And so he had started a solar company in 2008 with an American called Village Energy. And the American now has moved back and works at Tesla, but Abu wanted to keep going. So when I met him in 2015, he said, hey, I'm training these solar technicians, and I had this great idea. And I'm like, that's great, I'm on leave. Let me help you for a couple months, just for free, and see if I can help you get some funding, because you have a great story and a great idea. And we ended up getting into an accelerator program that came with money. So I said, okay, I ended up leaving Google and saying, all right, well, let me just be here for a couple months and see if I can get some additional experience helping you. And that's why I ended up becoming like a new co-founder on Village Energy as we launched this company. And that's still going. We have about 20 employees, and we have a new CEO who's Kenyan. So we're actually one of the only solar companies in East Africa who's actually run by an African female. It's a very expat-dominated space. I'm on the board. And so about a year into it, I realized that there was a huge need around human capital, that we were struggling to find solar technicians and sales agents who could actually do the job. And this was an industry-wide issue. So we developed this idea for a solar academy, and we said, wait, we need somebody who is actually in the education space. And I had a friend from my city year days, so this is a whole full circle thing, who had gotten her master's from Columbia in refugee education, and she was intending to go work in like Syria or South Sudan. So I convinced her to come to a safer place, Uganda, and instead help us launch a training academy. And so that's how she ended up becoming the co-founder of Enlight. And what we do now is we provide coaching services for last mile employers. So if you're looking to hire a bunch of 20 sales agents, and we've done a pilot with girls in northern Uganda to sell cook stoves for this company, it's like, yes, they may have some of the raw talent, but they need to be molded into employable people. Soft skills, professional skills, sales skills. And it has to be on the job. It can't just be one big training before. So that's what we're doing now, and we charge a monthly fee. So this year is really where we're finally starting to see traction. And so I stay in New York, my co-founder is in Uganda, and she runs our team. It's all female team in Uganda. And so we'll see what happens. But that's as short as I can say our summary of my story right now. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Maybe, Samlara, you founded Loo Works in 2014 with a pretty amazing vision, which is, you wanted to change the sanitation landscape in Ghana. How and why did you start Loo Works, and how has it been going for you?
Okay. Okay, so I suppose you can surmise from my accent that I spent quite a bit of time in the U.S. I spent about 20 years in the States and moved back to Ghana in 2013. When I moved back, I initially moved back with an indigenously Ghanaian company. I was going to work and be near my family. That was it. I had an intention of saving the world, but from a worker bee perspective. I didn't necessarily want to take all the risk and decide to venture into create my own path and create a path for others. So Loo Works came about as a result of just an obvious need. I landed, if I'm being candid, I had a really soft landing. I lived in a family house in a really nice neighborhood in Accra. I would run every morning, and my entire 3-mile run was sidewalks. This sounds silly, but we didn't have sidewalks like that in Accra in 2013. So it just goes to show that it was a neighborhood that we didn't deal with open sanitation or open defecation directly. So on one of my morning runs, on many of my morning runs, I'd see, people urinating outside. But then there was one day though that I said to myself, wait, something's happening. Somebody had gotten off of a trotro. He had gotten off of a public bus and had fully suited. He could have been my employee, and he went to squat by a wall. And this sounds terrible to some. It sounds some way in the Western world, but the reality was all I was seeing was that obviously there's a need. Why is there a need here? I think some part of me understood that I'd always realized open sanitation or open defecation happened, but I had categorized it as happening along the shore side or the seaside. And that's not okay either, but I hadn't dealt with it. And so in that moment, I started searching, and what I found was that as early as 5:30 in the morning, people would line up in certain areas. We had public toilets, but they were being used as somebody's pay-per-use, once-a-day use, because there wasn't a toilet in their home. Now, fast forward, I do the research, I find out what's available in the city, and Accra is an urban city with more than 5 million in population. So and maybe to Lagos it doesn't sound like much, but to us it sounded like, it's industrialized so quickly. And so we've just found ourselves overpopulated in a very short time frame. Now, the additional pieces that really drove me was that really small municipal assemblies were spending more than $250,000 on cholera in one season. This didn't make sense to me because I felt like there must be a way to find a solution for households for a cheaper rate. If we're paying the public costs, there must be an alternative. So what it turned out in 2013 or 2014 was that $1 spent on sanitation was almost $5 spent in medical expenses. Now, that's on the world level. In Ghana, at the time, it was $1 spent could have saved us almost $290 at that time. So I moved forward trying to find solutions, trying to find who's doing what. I was able to find a local engineer who had created a biological digester. All he had done was box nature, essentially. So it's vermicomposting, and the digester, it doesn't need to be dislodged. It's essentially a 2 feet by 2 feet by 6 feet. It's not very large. So it's a box that takes care of the actual waste. The liquid is filtered through, the waste itself is eaten away. Great, so the household doesn't need to dislodge it. Now, you can pair that with a container-based toilet system. For those who don't know what those are, they essentially look like an outhouse or a mobile toilet. So now you have a complete sanitation system taking up relatively small amounts of space. In extremely overcrowded settlements, it seems like, oh, isn't that still too much space? But we can certainly find a way much more so than the alternative of a pit latrine or something that just collects more disease ultimately. So we ventured, when I say we, I started Loo Works and just started collecting engineers to essentially help me understand the landscape and the technology. Now, we did our first pilot project under a World Bank project that allowed us to really get to understand what implementation looked like within Accra. So we worked in every one of our municipal assemblies and we started a number of advocacy and education programs, and that became our main focus. But the implementation was a pilot to find out what we needed to do to actually get household toilets. Ultimately, what we found during this process was that households, under some of these subsidy programs that are still going on currently, households are willing to pay given the right amount of time. So the biggest pain point during this program wasn't households not being willing to pay. We had backlogs of households who had made payments but weren't getting delivery. So amongst all of the toilet providers in Accra at the time, we were only able to essentially put out, I think the number they gave me was we had about a 40% output with the pace of what was being paid. So collectively, talking to all of the different toilet providers, we realized that the actual container itself being supplied needs to change in order for households to actually get delivery. We started doing that, importing and then supplying them toilets. And the reason I pause when I say the importing component was because that wasn't sustainable. As we move ahead, Loo Works is now moving into manufacturing. We've supplied a number of toilets, that's wonderful. We continue our education programs and our advocacy campaigns. But now as we look to the future, we're going to be manufacturing in country. And I think what makes our story today doesn't talk about implementation any longer. We've shifted our position in the value chain to simply be a supplier to all these toilet providers that I referenced earlier. So what that means, when I say supplying, we are using wood plastic composites. That may mean nothing to most people in here, but it's a mix of sawdust and recycled plastic. So we've shifted to dealing with another sanitation issue in Ghana, which is the 25,000 tons of plastic waste we generate daily. Same. So now, being able to use that plastic for output in country has become our focus. So moving forward, we'll be manufacturing to create our toilet structures and digesters, but eventually we're looking at potentially modular homes and low-income homes made of the same material. That's our story.
Alexander, since you have the mic, I would love it if you could tell us a bit about why is it that you founded Alliance for AI, and why did you think there was a need for healthcare AI, for Africa?
Thank you very much. It's an honor to address you all in the room. I'm really happy to be here. Well, to tell you why we started Alliance for AI, I probably should go back to where I was born. I come from the ancient city of Benin in Nigeria. It used to be a global powerhouse back in the 1400s. But at the time when I was born, in the 1980s or thereabouts, it was a pretty humble place, right? Coming from such a humble background, I'm able to sit in front of you today because I've been responsible for deploying most of the NVIDIA GPUs on the major public clouds in the US and China. So why is that important? You're all familiar that our favorite president, Trump, is fighting intensely with China, right? US and China. And one of the big things they're fighting about is artificial intelligence. I don't know if you're familiar with why that's important, but many people have said that the country or companies that drive artificial intelligence will lead the world, right? So about 80% of all the AI that's trained in the world today runs on NVIDIA's technology platform. And NVIDIA is a company I work for, and I drive cloud business there. And so that has given me this privilege and opportunity to see what really the world is building with artificial intelligence. And it's incredible. It's really beautiful future that the world, at least parts of the world, is going to see. I'll just give one example. AI really, to think about it, it's not about flying robots or autonomous cars and what people keep talking about. Those are there, but that's not AI. AI is your phone. You're using Facebook today. That's AI, right? And more interestingly, at least for me, is applications in spaces like agriculture and healthcare. In the healthcare space, I can give a very clear example. With MRI machines, they're incredibly expensive, but at the same time quite slow. It can take maybe 20, 30 minutes at its slowest to capture medical image for a patient who's they're trying to scan for cancer, for example, right? So which means you can only look at maybe 2 patients an hour. With AI, companies are using the platform that we deployed to reduce that time from say 20, 30 minutes to 5 minutes. And now you can see 6 or more people, right? So this is happening in America and this is happening in China. And so what's happening is, well, this is where we start. This is Africa, right? And this is America. There's already a gap between us in terms of everything, really. But now they are improving themselves with America, with artificial intelligence. And so America and China and whoever follows, there may be like less than 10 countries in the world doing well with AI, by the way. They're not many. They're going to do this, right? And that's in 3 to 5, like it's already happening. It's not, we're not talking about a long time from now. It's happening. And I can see all of that flowing through my laptop every day. So I started to see that 15 months ago and realized that, okay, everybody in this room really needs to start an NGO that's helping Africa adopt AI. Otherwise, we're going to be there. And at that point, I don't know what is going to happen with the world. And this is literally, it's happening in front of us. 3 to 5 years, I think it will be like, you'll take that way. And so that's why we put together Alliance for Africa's Intelligence. It's my effort. I hope you start your own efforts, figure out how AI is important and how it can be, make it more accessible to parts of where you come from, right? With our work, we are a virtual accelerator. And as accelerators go, we work with startups, but in addition to startups, we also work with schools and governments. I'll just give short examples of those. In terms of the schools part, yesterday I spoke with a lady from Uyo. It's a small city in Nigeria, and she described how she's a philosophy major, but learns about AI on Facebook, and for the past 2 years has forced herself to learn through many means, and now hosts communities and trains people every weekend, up to 50 people. So we'll work with her to help her build a bigger school and a bigger program. So that's what we go around doing for schools across Africa with 7 countries now. In terms of for startups, we engage startups individually or more efficiently through accelerator programs and host AI clinics, where, for example, we can help startups that say they're AI startups. I'm sure you've said that before, where companies just put AI on their deck, but they don't really know what it means. Well, we like those guys. At least you know the words AI. How about we host a clinic with you and help you actually be AI, right? And show you where to find, say, $100,000 of free cloud credits to work with. So that's AI clinics. Finally, in terms of governments, we help, there's so many experts who are Africans, who are in the diaspora, who drive some of these technologies, right? But we don't influence our countries. And so with Alliance for AI, we try to find those people, put them into some sort of like league of experts, and then use them to provide advisory to African governments. And the first one we've done that with is South Africa, right? So after 8 months of working with President Rehmah Kasule government, 6 days ago, he became the chair of the Africa Union, and he announced that AI would be one of his priority programs, right? He announced the Africa AI Forum. And so that's a huge win for us. So now it's a skeleton, it's just an announcement. And so now we have to work to put flesh on that bone. And I hope you're able to check our website, see how much progress we've made, see if you want to volunteer or work with us. I will provide grants, I like money too. Yeah, good, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this. And maybe Rehmah, now you tell us a little bit. You founded CEDA International in Uganda. Your impact has been huge. Like yes, as I was reading through all the things you've done, your work addressed, among other things, youth employment, education, gender equity. Tell us about all of this. How has your journey been?
Thank you. I also start from where I come from, because if you don't know where you've been, you never know where to go. So I was born a village girl, but I refused to become a village woman. I was born in a small village in Uganda called Gomba, and growing up, I saw the inequality that was happening in my village. I'm a Muslim, I'm a Muganda. Muganda, for those who know, our culture is one of the most rigid cultures. And every day, I questioned my mom to say, how come we go to fetch water when our brothers are playing football? For me, that was critical. I was young. Secondly, I didn't question. My mother was always so annoyed with me because I spoke so much. And in my culture, you're not supposed to speak much. And from a young age, I knew it was wrong. Today, we talk about gender equality and gender empowerment. But unless we change the way we do things in our homes, it will never shift. And for me, that's the basis of my work. Giving young women a voice to speak. For them to have the agents to say, you know what, I can do that. My father died when I was only 8 years, and my mother was married off at 16 years. So like her, so many girls today are still being married off at 16 or 18 years. And still, that's the basis of my work. At 26 years, I started my own business. That's another long story. But after running that business for more than 10 years, I was reading the global entrepreneurship report, and it said businesses fail between 1 to 2 years. And I had run mine for 10 years. I thought about it and said, how come they don't get it? So 2009, I shifted. It was a branding and marketing firm I was running. I shifted from building brands to shifting mindsets by starting my non-profit organization. So my business was Century Marketing. I started Century Entrepreneurship Development Agency, which is CEDA International today. And we talk about funding, and I love this conversation because we are talking to social entrepreneurs. When I started my business, first of all, I didn't have money, I didn't have networks, I had very little skills, but I had the passion in me. I knew that my background would not shape my destiny. I had the power to design the future I wanted. And that's all I had. This passion in me to say, I can do it. Of course, I had a lot of dream takers. People who told me, you can never make it. You're too young, you're just a woman, you're a Muslim woman. You'll never make it. But I knew that I would make it. And today when I look back, I look at them and say, you are so wrong about me. And it's that one message I want you to take to anyone, to say, you too can do it. And that story for me is not a story. Like my Angelo said, I stand as one, but behind me are 10,000 women and girls. Those girls and women who have no voice, who are told you're not beautiful enough, you can never make it. It sounds simple, right? When you think, oh, getting a voice is the one thing that can liberate us. And I'm saying this, not girls and women, even as Africans, we have a voice. Can we speak in global conferences and people say, yes, an African said something that is really true and makes sense. So that's the basis of my work. And for me, it's about all of us realizing that we can all make a difference. Today, and I'll ask you if we are really truthful to ourselves, we know someone else who wanted to come to this conference, but they didn't have money. Did we think about helping them out? Or are we going to talk about venture investment and philanthropic investment when we can't even give $1 to our sister or our brother? Think about someone in your village who needs only $200 to start a business. Are they going to pitch an idea? No. They don't have the skills, they don't have the platform, they don't have the opportunity to do that. So that's the basis of my work. Opportunity, voice, supporting each other, and growing together.
I guess my second question is, you all decided to create something new, and that's hard. Not everyone needs to start their own thing and start something new. What surprised you along the way? And that could be something that you learned about yourself, or something that you surprised you about building a company, or about the space of the country you all operated in. Maybe if you're ready to start.
Every day I get surprises. For me, what surprised me about myself, and I'll be truthful, sometimes I overthink. I think too much and too fast. And I realized it wasn't working. I realized it wasn't working because I was losing people around me. My workers were leaving and quitting every day, but no one ever told me anything because they feared me. They said, I remember one woman who told me, "You make us feel so stupid." And I'm like, really? Is that how you see me? And as a leader, I could have said, no, it's my company, I know what I'm doing. But that's the day I realized, you know what? I don't have to change who I am as a person, but I can change the way I deal with other people. So with that, I realized that each one of them has their own unique skills and character and attitude. In my organization, we really emphasize attitude and passion. And then I realized that we are so different, but each one of us has something unique. But for me, it was about me being truthful to myself and saying, you know what? You need to change the way you're dealing with people. It's not about them changing to suit your needs, really.
Jay, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Rehmah just said also resonates as well, in terms of the way that, I've had to learn how to work in a very different culture, not speaking any of the local languages, and how do I still able to connect with people. A few things have surprised me. Number one, I think my own capacity for dealing with the emotional ups and downs of a startup, where you can have good news, bad news, good news, bad news, you're run out of money, and you're just able to be like, you know what, I'm gonna put in my day's worth of work, and then I'll go and still have a nice evening with friends. I think being able to put those mental boundaries and put that stress, because one thing that I've learned is that so much is outside your control. Whether we fail or succeed, really, I might have something to do with it, I may have nothing to do with it. So actually finding the happiness in the input rather than the output. Just because your business fails does not mean you are an unsuccessful entrepreneur. And just because your business succeeds doesn't mean that you were the peak person to do it. So I think really having that sort of humility to go into is something I had to learn over time. A second thing I learned as well is that how often, once you're able to find these sort of platforms, it's easy to find supporters when you're working on something. And how many times we were just thinking, it's going to take a miracle to save us, we're going to run out of money in a few weeks, and then something just happens. Something just happens. And it came out of a completely unexpected quarter, and somewhere where you made a connection where you had no idea that was going to pay off. So I think for me, kind of that surprise of like, oh my gosh, like actually, help will come when you most need it, but sometimes it won't come until you most need it. And then I think the third thing too is, actually, it's funny that I actually also didn't feel comfortable with my own voice. So, I remember being selected as an Active in East Africa Fellow, and I was the only Westerner because I was born and raised in the United States. My parents were immigrants from India, and they had their own story of refugee and village and all that sort of stuff. But me personally, I grew up in a upper middle class home. So I come and walk into this room and I'm feeling a bit of imposter syndrome. What am I doing in this room full of some of these most amazing people from across Africa? And what is my value add here? I'm just some privileged Westerner. And it took me a while. It's like, oh wait, actually my story also has value. And people are seeming to find inspiration. So I also learned that no matter how privileged or not privileged your background, somebody out there is going to get inspired by your story because they're in the same situation as you. And I think there is also that value, and I think that's why it's so important to have forums where you can have an equal exchange of ideas and have it all on the level playing field, and not that one is more or less important than the other, because at the end of the day, no matter circumstances, we all have the same agency and the same capacity to make decisions. So, yeah, those are the most surprising things.
Maybe Alexander, you can also share some of
Similar
your
question?
surprises.
Yeah, definitely. I guess I'll speak about one. This is around just growing companies, be it a social enterprise, NGO, or for-profit company. And this is important because I did notice that very many African and even Black businesses tend to stay very small and not grow. Mostly you have the founder end up doing all the work, most times by choice actually. They decide to just monopolize the whole thing and not grow. And so I and my team, we have to think deeply about what it takes to actually grow businesses. And I'll use a sports analogy to think about this. I watch a lot of football, soccer, and so with that, it's almost like, yes, when you start out as the founder or co-founders of this thing, you have the vision and you're like a captain of a team, and then you recruit players. But really very quickly, you should start thinking about how you're able to almost move towards being a coach. Not the captain who's playing, but being a coach. So you should very actively start to identify people in your team that you can train to do other things. And even with them, encourage them that the true point of growth with them is at the point where they can say, look, I've trained someone else to do my current role. And then you say, all right, now you're ready for the next step, right? And so that's how you keep growing. So we've really tried to imbibe that a lot within our Alliance for AI over the last 15 months. And I think that's how we've been able to grow pretty quickly and achieve what we have in a short time.
Okay, so if I speak to the things that surprised me, I think a lot resonates with me from what you've already heard. As far as the human capital component, we do have amazing human capital on the continent. We do have our issues that will come up with engaging our employees, and some of that looking inward is necessary to make sure that we really are able to best facilitate the needs of our teams. One of the biggest components, though, that really shocked me was centered around being able to jump into manufacturing, knowing that, okay, our economies need some type of growing businesses that live beyond the founder. To Alexander's point, most of our businesses do die with the founder. Now, with that said, I thought manufacturing this is an aspect of economic development that we are in desperate need of. And Ghana specifically has marketed itself so well in the past decade. And as such, I thought I'd get a lot more opportunity to feel supported. But I think one of the pieces that surprised me is how much resistance I received with regard to jumping into manufacturing, because it was a sexier story for the nation or for the for the ministries to hear that we're doing sanitation and we have a Black female founder amongst us, as opposed to founder in manufacturing, as it was termed to me a couple times, that it's more of a leave the men to do it field. So in this day and age, it will still come up on an ongoing basis. And I think you can find coalitions, you can find support, regardless of what you need. To Jay's point, every single day, you will have some type of small I guess I'll point it loss, but you'll also have wins. So being able to get up every day simply means you're focused on the wins. Just being able to go back to that passion every day, day in and day out, has pushed me past some of these surprises.
And since we only have half an hour, and I promised and agreed with them that we wanted to keep this rather on the informal side, I do want to open it up for your own questions, and you can steer this conversation whatever direction you choose. So, do you have any questions?
My name is Dan Kananango from Kenya. My question goes to literally all of you. I think the way you structured your businesses makes it look like all of them are sort of NGOs or non-profits, probably looking for, leveraging the support of grants as source of capital. My question is, can you still do business with the social impact in Africa without necessarily leveraging grants?
I'm sorry if you had that impression. We're a for-profit business. And I am somebody who staunchly believes that we don't need to give it away to be a social enterprise. I think that you can leverage grants even as a for-profit entity if you are a social enterprise. We've done so. We've had help from UNDP, UNICEF, the Gates Foundation, but all under the guise of a for-profit entity.
Yeah, both of our businesses are for-profit. And Enlight actually in particular, that's our bet is that human capital unlocks so much economic value for the companies they work for. And all we need to do is figure out some way to capture an even tiny piece of that. And we can make a successful business in the ed tech sector, which is a sector that is quite difficult, honestly. I do think that sometimes we take for-profits too far. Like for the most part, like a lot of these initiatives around like private education models for early childhood, I don't know, like even some of this health stuff, I do think that there is a government role that is being shirked there that the private sector cannot fundamentally make up for, and that includes in America. But I do think that where grant money comes in, and we have been mostly grant funded, and that helps in a couple ways. Number one, because of product testing. I mean, we're going after populations where there isn't good data on, that you need time to collect that data on your customers. It's a lot easier to collect financial data on people who have bank accounts and credit cards. It's a lot harder to do that when you're dealing with people who are completely off the grid. So you need time. The second thing is human capital. You build a team, and yes, human capital is unlocked, but it takes 6 to 12 months. Like, we're still training our financial manager on how to do QuickBooks. That'll take time to pay off, but if you take investment money just to pay for that person's time, that money's not gonna come back. It's not like investing in equipment. So you have to be very, very careful. And so that's why I'm a huge fan of blended models where we say, okay, we get some grant money that's gonna cover, say, overhead and cover some of these costs of training, but at the same time, we're still gonna charge our customers, and we're still going to build that model so that we can eventually get real investment. So I do think that that blended approach can pay off for a lot of businesses, including ours.
Personally, I started out in a for-profit company, and for me, this is what I'm going to say. Number one rule to any business: use someone else's money to grow your business. Once you understand that, it doesn't matter where the money comes from, as long as it's legal. Yeah, you have to underscore that. It has to be legal. But wherever it comes from, whether it's the government that pays you to do the work, whether it's individuals, whether it's a grant. So when we talk about social entrepreneurship, yes, people always have the mindset to think, oh, that's NGO work. No. And even if it's NGO, we need to shift the narrative from being charity to being social driven or having a social mission. Once you understand that, you can position any business as a social business. I'll give you an example, my organization and what we do. When we empower young people to have jobs, to be employable or create their own businesses, I can get money from private sector to pay me to support their employees or to build for them pipelines of leaders. But I can also get money from the UN, for example, because everyone is talking about capital and social and human development, and they pay me to do the same work. So think globally, think about systems, think about the whole ecosystem, and think how you're going to grow your business based on that model, so that you don't just look for the consumer as the person who's going to pay you. It can be a broad array of people or organizations who pay you to do the same work.
Okay, sorry. Thank you so much. My name is Tony. I'm from DRC. And thank you for sharing the story. And I think my question has two sides. So, in your journey, what is the biggest failure that you have? And how did you get out from that failure? But then in that failure, what are those times where you were the limit of yourself? If you can share. I don't know that question.
And maybe you can also say your question just in case there's
Yeah, so a couple of questions. Thanks a lot for what you shared so far. My name is Samlara Baah. I'm a graduate at Patel University. First of all, you mentioned about like getting grants, of course, like from even though you're for profit. So my question is kind of like, how do you tell your story such a way you get the grants without like, did you have to first of all use your money to do the work, then show people like, oh, I've done this, so I can get grants, or like, did you have this idea of helping people, then just pitch it to get grants? That's the first question. Then the second question is like, how did you exactly go about your need assessment? Like, I believe in Africa, it's kind of difficult to get like hard data or like verified data, right? So like go about like, oh, there's like 1 million people that need this, and this is like the market size, or this are people I can offer the services to. So how do you go about that? Then last question is for you, Ms. Rehmah. How exactly does CEDA make money? That's the last question. Thanks.
Okay, so we have 4 questions. We have failure. We have a question about funding structure in terms of sustainability. We have a question on data regarding the market sizing, market research, etc. And Rehmah, there's a question for you about how do you become financially sustainable business being profit. I'll leave that.
I'm not going to answer the hard ones. About CEDA and how we make money. Like I said, we work with young girls and women and boys, actually. We run a youth center in one of the slum areas in Kampala called Kawempe. So how we make money is we build pipelines of leaders and employees. So private sector businesses, banks, telecommunication, pay us to build for them pipeline of leaders. We do executive coaching for women in positions to rise from junior level up to CEO, up to board level. We train women to go to parliament. Last year, 2016, I trained 50 women, and 30 of them entered the parliament of Uganda. Thank you. For me, that was so personal to me because I'll give a short story, very short. 2014, a bill was brought to Parliament where they were going to give sanitary towels to all girls in secondary schools. And the men got up and said, no, we are overpowering women. How come everything is going to the girls? And all the women kept quiet. And the bill was never passed. And that's the day I realized we can't have numbers of women in Parliament without having a voice. And I made it my mission to train more women to go to Parliament, not to represent us, but to speak and table bills and be active. And that's what they're doing. That no one paid me for that. So in structuring your social venture, whatever you're doing, think about the multiple areas of how you can get the money. And that will lead me to the failing. It doesn't matter how hard you fail, It's how you rise up that matters. You're going to fail so many times, and if you fear failure, you never become an entrepreneur. Because you're going to fail so many times, and sometimes you feel like pulling your hair out to say, you know what, why am I doing this? And for the weaker ones, that's the day you go and get a job. Yes. Yeah, because you'll be like, yeah, why am I doing this? And you look at your friends driving good cars and having all these corporate jobs, and you're going to give up. So for me, one of the things still sounds simple, but yes, think about yourself and know who you are, have good intentions, and the more precise you are about your intentions and why you want to do what you want to do, that will define your purpose and it will define your passion. And without intention, purpose, and passion, you never succeed in business or any other work.
So I'll focus on another question around funding. So here's the thing. So Africa has a very weird, I think maybe Nigeria or some other of the largest one, or Kenya might be a bit different, but most African countries suffer from a very unique problem. So if you talk to VCs in the United States and you ask them, who do you invest in? I've heard this multiple times. I will not invest in anybody I cannot get to by lunchtime, or I cannot invest in anyone I cannot get to on a bike. The problem is that in Uganda, for the most part, local banks don't really lend. There's not a lot of local capital, so we're mostly asking for funding from people who sit on another continent. That creates a weird system, and honestly, the truth is that we will never have, an African entrepreneur who has not spent time in the West will never have the same advantages of getting that money as people who have spent time in the West. Which is why I'm so excited to see so many of you in the room who are part of the diaspora, because you can bridge that gap. The reason that we're able to get funding is because, especially with Village Energy, I mean, and he also is one of the directors of Enlight, he's Ugandan. He's also a Muslim who grew up in rural Uganda and has the local connections and can tell that real story. But at the same time, I'm the one who does all the writing. And I'm the one who has that, I went to, Ivy League school, etc. So that 1-2 combination was what really, basically, having Abu made people excited to invest in us, but I'm the one who actually made it comfortable. And so being able to understand very well, how are you positioning yourself and having that sort of thing. So that's why if you're a diaspora and you're somebody who is from these countries and has gone, you're the best of both worlds. You're able to be that bridge. And if you are somebody who's one but not the other, then maybe look for somebody who is in the other space who can help you with in terms of presenting like a united package to these, mostly right now, foreign investors. And I hope that one day we have enough diaspora investment, enough local investment, that you don't need to go to a Western donor in the United States and Europe in order to get this funding. But I definitely say that having that dual combination. Now, I will answer real quickly on how do you get this money? Having a clarity of the need. So yes, I do think it takes being on the ground and having some sort of idea of what the problems are, but you can grant money to do the market assessment. So if you apply and say, hey, we think there's an issue, but we need to understand further what the mechanisms might be, there is funding out there. And there is funding out there for African-led businesses. As long as, and they're looking for something. So, so that's, I think, how you can do it. And the last thing I'll say is around failure. Our first business model, Village Energy, failed. Our idea was to set up these little solar shops. There would be these one-stop shops where you could buy a solar lantern as well as get a custom installation. And because we were selling to all these different groups, we'd have enough money flowing in that we could support having a shop in a rural area where no other company was having a permanent presence. That failed. We were not able to get our people trained enough to be able to sell to different multiple customer groups at the same time. Operationally, it became too difficult to handle different things. Our key partnership with a major solar company failed. We had employee fraud, and we were literally going to run completely out of money and not be able to pay back our original angel investors. But that's when I hopped on a plane to Europe and said, hey, but we actually, out of this failure, there's these glimmers. There's a huge need around custom solar installations for productive use. And since we've done all these learnings over the last couple of years, give us more money to basically go and execute, and this is what we've learned. And that's what got us the funding that we needed to keep going and to pivot our business model. So there are going to be these cycles of failure, but that leads to learnings, that leads to more funding, that could lead to some failure, that leads to more learnings. And as long as you're able to tell that consistent story, you'll be able to find people willing to put more money into you.
Provide a, I guess, quick response to some of those questions. Well, mostly the failure one. My two words for how I address failure, there are two things. It's one of them is mindset, and the second one is diversification, having options, right? On the mindset piece, right from a very young age, I was that child who was 10 years old and into house sports, could not run fast. I always took joy in the fact that I never finished last. I was always second to last. So there was one person I beat, and the games had food, so I ate. So that was great, right? So that's where I come from. And so today, I almost never have. That's why I had a tough time answering the question, because I never think of the word failure. Every day is a success. I learned something that day. I met someone that day that improved me from the day before. So it's never really. So that was kind of hard. But in terms of the second piece, I said diversification. Every week, I think we have to face a serious fire, if it's not every day, but mostly every week there's one big fire that you need to turn off. We've been able to succeed so far because we try to have multiple options all the time. Every time we're working on the key objective, let's have 3 paths towards success, and hopefully not all 3 fail. Sometimes they do. With funding, we have not raised enough, but I think nobody ever raises enough money. I think the song says even Dangote still find money. So we're still looking for money. So yeah, well, that's a failure in itself. We need to raise more. Thank you.
I'm actually curious, since you're a virtual accelerator, do you support some of the startups that you help with getting access to some investors? Is that something you do?
Yes, so we have a wealth of knowledge of global companies that have these funds to give. And those are companies, Google, Nvidia, Microsoft, very, very actively promote these resources to startups around the world. But that world does not include Africa. There's absolutely there's no promotion to African companies that using these key technologies. And so every time we hear about those things, we pick them and put it on our. So we have a newsletter that goes out every 2 weeks. Next one is tomorrow. So maybe go to our website, allianceforAI.org, and join the newsletter. We post all those opportunities on there. Right now, there's one for $15,000 that we're promoting. So yeah.
And Samlara, maybe one part of you could answer the question around data, because you cited a lot of statistics early on, including potential benefits that you quantified. So maybe talk about the data difference.
So the data piece was actually the component I was not going to reference, but I'll speak to it and say that, to Alexander's point, you can use your funding to get the needs assessments done. You can use your funding to honestly detail your story and talk through your failures. Talk through the pieces that are not working because you don't have XYZ data. So regardless of what your venture is, you have to know that funders realize that they don't have enough data from the continent, and that's part of why they are interested. So you want to be able to gather that information for them in a way that works for your venture. So speak to it. Now, when we speak to the populations we serve, I do serve unbanked populations for the most part. So I have partnered with municipal assemblies. So in different countries, it'll sound different and they'll have different titles, but local governments. And so I've partnered with some of our local governments or district representatives in an effort to be able to set up a way they could collect funds. It's not their role per se to somebody else's ears, and being in a policy school, I totally understand that. But at the end of the day, it works to ensure that they can let me know how much people are willing to pay. Let me go to the ministries to find out what we're actually doing about plastics in country, what they already know. But what they don't know, I know that I can find new ways for us to garner that information. So it all goes back to being able to seek to understand, make sure you understand the questions that are still existing in your climate or in your terrain, and be very honest about that. I want to tie it into your question around funding, because grants are interesting, and to each of the points already made, I'll say that you're in school. You just mentioned that, correct?
Yeah.
So the resources at your fingertips are immense. You're in school in DC, in this country. The resources are immense. Ask the people who are researching in the areas that are interesting to you. And more than anything, something that frustrates me in Ghana specifically, but on the continent I see it in different ways, is that you need to be the brand before you are the brand. So you need to tell everyone what you are venturing into. I know so many people, oh, I need to keep it secret so that I can, nobody will copy me. You'll never get the funding if no one knows you're doing it. I got a lot of funding simply because people email me to say, hey, this would be perfect for you. Because they know my brand. They know what I'm venturing into. They know what I want to do next. And be very honest with your funders, with your investors, about what your failures have been, what you don't know. Do not try to purport that you know everything there is to know in Lagos, the 21 million, what they are thinking, because no one will fund you. No one would believe you. Why would I send my money from here across the seas to be able to give you money and never see it again? So please be mindful that the truth matters. Every investor I feel like I've spoken to speaks to the fact that they invest in the person more than the business. They believe in the business, but they have to trust the person. So more than anything, tell them your failures, tell them what you don't know and what you are looking to garner, but be smart about it. Have your numbers, have your past history, what you've already done, where you're headed, have your strategy unlocked.
Thank you.
Two more questions on this slide. Yeah, and then you. Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. Thank you all for being here. It's been an amazing experience up here in Phoenix. Didn't know about this till about a week ago, so this is incredible. My name is Olivia. So my question, I guess, is across the panel. I know Alexander said it. So I started a nonprofit specifically around women empowerment in the community and professionally and socially. And we're growing very well in Phoenix, but I guess my struggle is not being the captain and being the coach. Because now as we're growing, you know, I kind of have to relinquish some of my responsibilities and stop doing it all myself. And that's something that I struggle with because I want to keep the authenticity and the purity of our brand. So how do you go about that transition and being a coach?
Do you want to say your question as well?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for being here. My name is Emma, by the way. I think my question really is for anyone on the panel. I was just wondering, as a for-profit business, how do you measure impact? Is there a framework system that you use that makes you accountable to investors, stakeholders, potential stakeholders, to show that you're actually making that?
Are there any questions?
Maybe I'll.
Sorry. So, my name is Olu. So I have a question around trying to understand. So how do you guys get, is there a website you look up these grants that, you know, I know there's a lot of people talk about grants. Is that, how do you find them, you know, so you can actually apply to them and, you know, then they, you know, and get the money, you know, they agree with your ideas? How do you find that?
Since we have 5 minutes, each of you can take the question.
So I'll just take the coach one and then take the other one. So with that one, it's very difficult, I think. It's very difficult, but then maybe two things that have really helped. One of it is recruiting, is in hiring. And then the second, hiring for passion and culture fit, alignment with you yourself, right? And then the second one is around really just learning almost to let go. I think a lot of people try to protect their jobs and their roles, and so they don't want to teach others because they're thinking, if someone else learns how to do this, I'm going to get fired or let go. But really, I think folks in leadership are aware that that's an important skill set to have, and if you demonstrate that you're willing to be open and teach, they actually value you and promote you more as against get you, allow you to get fired. So I spend more on the second one, but the first one in terms of hiring for fit, yeah, definitely thinking about while you're hiring, trying to gauge for someone who is as passionate about the cause as much as you are. Yeah. What's-
For us, I agree with that. I also say we also pay like below market, like even in Uganda, so people are taking a pay cut to come to us. And so we kind of promise them, look, like you're not going to make as much, but you're going to learn a lot more. So hiring people who want to be coached and want to be trained and want to learn is like 80% of the battle. The last 20% is just finding the time and the willingness to kind of let go a little bit. But yeah, I think it's the biggest compliment when somebody can do your own job. There will always be something else to do. So like, don't ever feel as a leader that you're going to be out of work. Just, I would love to be able to sit on a beach and just chill all day while my team does everything. So that's the dream. So I do think that, yeah, like learning the role and then thinking about what are the next steps, how can they keep pushing their things. And so bringing young people along to sales meetings, involving them in their strategy sessions, and making them feel like they own part of it is going to do a huge deal. Just real quickly on impact, that is a whole beast of a thing. There's no one answer. But every investor has their own thing, their own conversation with you about what impact is. And in terms of how you find the grants, honestly, going back to what you were saying around your network. The best grants we got were always through somebody forwarded to us via email. Hey, by the way, have you thought about applying for this? That's how we got like the 90% of our grants, because that's also the stuff that's harder to know about on the internet, so you're gonna have less competition. Is just through the word of mouth network. So yeah, I completely agree with you. Be vocal about what you're working on, even if you haven't figured it out yet. Know where you're going, and tell everybody, tell everyone. You never know when somebody who's your mom's friends, cousins, brother-in-law heard about what you were doing and sent you something that turns out to be really impactful. So.
To your question, so I've been running my CEDA International for the last 10 years. And 2 years ago, I shifted from that. Every 10 years, I renew myself. So how did I manage to do that? First of all, I didn't think about it as a succession plan, but I just knew I needed to go out because I felt personally the work was too easy for me. I really make a great impact, but intellectually, it wasn't stimulating anymore. We go to schools, mentor girls, train the women, and that wasn't for me anymore. But I had built a great team of people. One of the women has been with me for the last 14 years. She was my PA in my business and moved with me to the social enterprise. So having those smart people around you really helps a lot. But secondly, to Jay's point, is you empowering them. I remember many times I've been invited to international events, and I tell one of my team members to say, it will be you to go. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, founders want to hop on the plane everywhere. It's not me, I don't like flying, but for me, I was doing it to empower them. And believe it or not, when they go and they know they are representing you, they want to be even much better than you. They prepare and prepare and prepare, and before you know it, everyone will call you to say, oh my God, the woman you sent was so brilliant. And you're like, yes, I'm doing something good. So when you empower people around you, you can easily leave your organization. Don't let it die, by all means, but at least give them enough support. Even my funders, I had to tell them, you know what, don't email me, email them. So you're the brand, the owner, but remember that the day you die, the business will die. And for you men, yes, for the men, you even keep it away from your wife. And I'm saying that because my brother died 2 weeks ago, and his wife didn't know anything about his business. And he's been a wealthy man, he has a lot of businesses. But the wife doesn't know anything about the businesses. So now everything is upon us, the sisters, to make sure that businesses survive. What a shame. I know even women hide money from their husbands. You can that's conversation for another day. But just to leave you with something, for me, if you didn't take anything from this session, I love what Einstein said, that the world is not dangerous because of those who do harm, but because of those who look at it without doing anything. So my question to you, are you going to sit and do nothing? And I'll ask you a question. I know it's not my role, we have a moderator. But you need to give me an answer so that we see if we are really going to become social entrepreneurs and change Africa. So there were 3 birds on an electric wire. 2 decided to fly away. How many remained and why? I can repeat, I know English is not our first language, right? There were 3 birds on an electric wire. 2 decided to fly away. How many remained? I need an answer and a reason, yes.
2 decided to fly away. 3 remained because 2 decided to, but they didn't fly away. So the 3 of them still remain.
The difference in the wire was insulated.
I must admit I wasn't there.
I think 1 flew away because the 2 were talking about it so much that the other one was like, oh, stop it, and just flew away.
No.
Last one.
I'd say the 2 that flew away, they were able to thrive, but the one that stayed on the wire died. So there's none.
Okay, so I'll give to the gentleman, what's your name?
Matt.
Matt. So that's a critical question. We train our young people to have critical thinking. That's a critical question. So 3 birds, 2 decided, but they never flew away. So every day we decide, I'm going to start a business, I'm going to do this, I'm going to apply for that job, I'm going to apply for that master's degree, but we actually never do it. Don't we do that? Yes. Every day we decide. And we are the dream takers of our own dreams. So we decide and not do it. So I'm going to give you a book. This is a book I wrote. It's called From Gomba to, remember the village I taught you? Gomba to the White House. I wrote this book when I was invited by President Obama in recognition of my work. And I realized that your background doesn't shape your destiny. You have the power to design the future you want. So I'm going to give you this book after the session because you are critical thinker.
Thank you all so much for taking your time and for your generosity. And our panelists will be here for maybe 5 to 10 minutes if you want to say while you're asking questions. Thank you.